The Ivywood Club was known to be the most exclusive private club in the city, a sanctuary for the powerful, where secrets and influence traded hands behind ornate wooden doors. Located in the heart of downtown, the grand building stood hidden behind ivy-covered walls, its towering iron gates only opening for the most elite. The club was a world away from the everyday bustle, its members politicians, CEOs, and old-money aristocrats who ruled the city's economy and shaped its laws. On a cool autumn night, the club hosted one of its prestigious dinners. The chandelier-lit dining room buzzed with laughter and conversation as the city's elite sipped on their vintage wines. The dinner was a celebration of sorts, though no one outside the walls knew exactly what was being celebrated. Ivywood had always thrived on secrecy, and tonight was no different. At 10:32 p.m., the head of the club, Bernard Winthrop, excused himself from the table to make a phone call. Tall, silver-haired, and always impeccably dressed, Winthrop was known as the gatekeeper of Ivywood. He disappeared down a hallway that led to the upper floors, where only the most senior members were permitted. Minutes later, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the corridors. The dinner party froze. Within moments, guests rushed toward the source of the sound, their heels clicking against the marble floors. What they found was Bernard Winthrop, sprawled on the floor of his private office, a pool of blood spreading from a deep wound in his chest. His eyes were wide open, frozen in shock. Beside him, a letter opener stained with crimson lay discarded on the floor. Panic rippled through the room. How could someone have murdered Winthrop inside a club with such tight security? The doors were locked, the cameras monitored. But most disturbing of all, everyone in the club had an airtight alibi. It seemed impossible that one of them could have done it. Yet, the evidence suggested otherwise. The police arrived quickly, led by Detective Sarah Kendall, a sharp and relentless investigator who had tangled with the city's elite before. She knew the Ivywood's reputation, and this case was bound to be more than just a simple murder. Winthrop's death was the first crack in the club's polished facade, and Kendall was determined to uncover whatever secrets lay beneath. Detective Kendall stood in the dimly lit office, her gaze locked on Bernard Winthrop's lifeless body. She had seen plenty of crime scenes in her career, but this one was different. The Ivywood Club reeked of power, money, and untold secrets. She could feel it in the air. The members of this club held the kind of influence that could bury the truth or destroy reputations, and she knew that solving this murder would require more than just her usual tactics. "Tell me about the guests tonight," she said to Officer Mike Lane, her partner. Lane handed her a tablet with the guest list. "It's a short one, all high profile. We've got 2 city council members, the CEO of Harlan Tech, a couple of real estate moguls, and a retired federal judge. But there's something else. I did a quick search on Bernard Winthrop. Seems he's been at the center of some rumors lately, whispers about blackmail, secret deals. People have been saying the Ivywood Club isn't just a playground for the rich. It's a place where dangerous favors are exchanged." Kendall raised an eyebrow. And now Winthrop's dead. Convenient timing. She studied the office. It was lavish, with mahogany shelves lined with expensive liquor and old books. But what caught her attention was the desk, particularly the hidden compartment underneath. It was slightly ajar, almost like it had been opened recently. Kneeling down, Kendall slid it open further and discovered a small ledger inside. Flipping through its pages, she realized it was a record of meetings, payments, and names. Names of Ivywood members, alongside cryptic notes. Some were marked with dollar amounts, others with what appeared to be favors that would be impossible to fulfill without the right kind of power. "This," she muttered, "is not just a social club." Lane peered over her shoulder. "Looks like Winthrop was keeping track of something big. Might be blackmail material. A lot of people might want him silenced if they knew he had this." Kendall slipped the ledger into an evidence bag. The more she uncovered, the more tangled this web became. Winthrop's death wasn't just about him. It was about the whole club, a place where secrets were currency and everyone had something to lose. "Let's start talking to the members," she said, standing up. "Someone in this building knows more than they're letting on." Detective Kendall wasted no time in rounding up the Ivywood members for questioning. The once glamorous dining room now felt oppressive, its crystal chandeliers casting eerie shadows over the pale faces of the guests. Each one of them sat stiffly, eyes darting nervously, as they awaited their turn. The first to be questioned was Henry Clarkson, a real estate tycoon who owned half the city. He was in his mid-50s, stocky with thinning hair, and had a reputation for being ruthless in business. Kendall had read about Clarkson before his deals were legendary, but there were always rumors about how he managed to outmaneuver competitors, rumors that suggested foul play. Kendall sat across from Clarkson, her expression unreadable. "Tell me about your relationship with Bernard Winthrop." Clarkson wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "We were acquaintances. He ran the club, and I attended dinners occasionally. That's it. Nothing more." "Acquaintances?" Kendall raised an eyebrow. "I find that hard to believe. I've seen the guest list for tonight. You don't just show up at Ivywood if you're a casual acquaintance." Clarkson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Fine. Bernard and I worked together on a few real estate ventures. He connected me with some powerful people in the city. But our relationship was purely professional. I had nothing to gain from his death. Kendall leaned forward, her gaze intense. Nothing to gain. That's not what it looks like to me. I found a ledger in Winthrop's office. It lists meetings and favors involving club members. Your name is in there, next to a sizable dollar amount. Clarkson's face paled. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about. It must be some mistake. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Kendall cut in sharply. Whatever deals you were making with Winthrop weren't above board, and now he's dead. You need to start talking, or this will only get worse for you. Clarkson's eyes darted toward the other members, then back to Kendall. Look, Bernard helped me secure a few key contracts, all right? He had connections, people in high places. And yes, there was money exchanged, but that's how business works in this city. But I swear, I didn't kill him. Why would I? He was my lifeline. Kendall watched him closely, but his fear seemed genuine. Still, it wasn't enough to clear him. You stay put, she ordered. We're not done. As she stood to leave, Clarkson grabbed her arm, his voice dropping to a whisper. Detective, you have no idea how deep this goes. Bernard, he wasn't just brokering deals. He was controlling people, powerful people. If you dig too far into this, you'll find things you can't unsee. Kendall pulled her arm free, her jaw tightening. She had dealt with threats before, but this one felt different. As she walked away, she could feel the weight of his words settling in. Next on Kendall's list was Amanda Harlan, CEO of Harlan Tech, a leading tech firm in the city. Amanda was in her early 40s, with sharp features, and a reputation for being as cold as the servers her company manufactured. As Kendall approached, she noticed Amanda sitting alone in a corner, staring at her phone as though the outside world didn't exist. Ms. Harlan, Kendall said, taking the seat across from her, I'm sure you know why I'm here. Amanda looked up slowly, her blue eyes icy. Yes, detective, I'm well aware. Bernard is dead, and you think one of us is responsible, so get on with it. Kendall admired her directness, but it was clear Amanda was used to being in control. Kendall would need to rattle her. What was your connection to Winthrop? Amanda leaned back in her chair. Ivywood was a place for business, detective. I came here to meet people who could help me, people with influence. Winthrop facilitated some introductions, but our relationship wasn't personal. Not personal, Kendall pulled out the ledger again and flipped to a page with Amanda's name. According to this, you owed him a favor. Care to explain? Amanda's jaw clenched. Bernard did some favors for my company. He helped me cut through some red tape on a new contract with the city. That's what Ivywood is for, detective connections. I didn't owe him anything. It was mutual. Kendall wasn't convinced. She leaned in, her tone growing more insistent. But what if Bernard had something on you? What if he wasn't just making introductions, but holding something over your head? Maybe you wanted to put an end to that. Maybe he pushed too far. Amanda's eyes darkened, and she leaned forward, her voice sharp. If you think I'm scared of some club manager, I deal with men like him every day. If Bernard thought he could control me, he was wrong. But I didn't kill him, detective. You're barking up the wrong tree. Kendall remained silent for a moment, studying her. Amanda was too composed, too careful with her words. But there was something underneath, something guarded. I'll need you to stay here until we finish, Kendall said, standing up. Amanda didn't protest, just returned to her phone as if the conversation had never happened. As Kendall stepped out of the room, she felt the tension rising. 2 interviews down, and both Clarkson and Harlan had motive. But the real question was, who had the most to lose? She glanced back at the dining hall, where the other members sat in uneasy silence. Somewhere in this group was a killer. The trick would be uncovering the secrets they were all desperate to keep hidden. Her gut told her this was only the beginning. Detective Kendall left the dining hall, her mind racing. Clarkson and Harlan were both hiding something, but neither gave her the sense they were desperate enough to kill. Yet Winthrop's murder wasn't just a crime of passion. It was calculated. The weapon was right there in his office, left behind like a calling card. Someone wanted her to follow this trail, but to where? As she headed toward the security room to review footage, she stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with an old brass plaque reading, "The Founder's Room." It was one of the most restricted areas in Ivywood, and rumor had it that only the top-tier members ever set foot inside. It wasn't a place for casual dinners or business meetings. It was where the real power brokers gathered. Kendall knocked twice before pushing the door open. The room was dimly lit by wall sconces, and a large oak table dominated the center. Leather-bound books filled the shelves, and on one wall hung portraits of Ivywood's original founders. But something caught her eye, a faint glow from a glass cabinet at the far end. Inside was a series of small, locked drawers. Curious, Kendall stepped closer, noticing one of the drawers slightly ajar. Carefully, she opened it further and found a file inside, its contents marked confidential. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. The documents detailed secret agreements, contracts between city officials, Ivywood members, and shadowy entities operating outside the law. There were land deals, political favors, and more disturbingly, personal leverage. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from the hallway outside. Kendall quickly closed the drawer, stuffing the file under her arm. Just as she turned to leave, The door creaked open, revealing a tall, well-dressed man with graying hair and an air of authority. "Detective Kendall," I presume he said, his voice smooth but tinged with suspicion. "And you are Kendall?" asked, her hand instinctively moving toward her badge. "Richard Everett," he replied coolly, chairman of Ivywood's board. "I'm sure you understand that this room is off limits to anyone without the proper clearance. May I ask what you're doing here?" Kendall didn't flinch. "Mr. Everett, one of your members was murdered tonight, and I have reason to believe the answer to why is hidden in this club. I'll go wherever this investigation takes me, clearance or not." Everett's expression hardened. "Ivywood has its own way of handling problems, detective. I suggest you tread carefully." Kendall met his gaze, unfazed by the thinly veiled threat. "And I suggest you cooperate. If I find out Ivywood is obstructing justice, you'll be dealing with more than just me." Without another word, Kendall brushed past Everett and left the founder's room, file in hand. As the door closed behind her, she could feel his eyes burning into her back. Back in the security room, Officer Lane was reviewing hours of footage from the night of the murder. Kendall joined him, placing the confidential file on the desk as she sat down. "Anything?" she asked, her frustration starting to build. "Not yet," Lane replied, scrolling through the footage of the club's hallways. "Cameras are placed at key entrances and exits, but Winthrop's office isn't directly covered. Only way in or out is down that corridor, though." Kendall watched the screen intently as guests moved in and out of view, each oblivious to the growing tension that was brewing within the club. Suddenly, Lane paused the footage. "Wait, look at this." On the screen, Amanda Harlan appeared, walking down the hallway near Winthrop's office, just before the estimated time of death. She paused by the door, glanced around, and then walked away quickly. Moments later, Richard Everett emerged from the opposite direction, casually entering the office without hesitation. "Looks like our chairman isn't just overseeing the club," Kendall muttered. "We need to bring him in for questioning." Lane nodded. "What about Amanda? That's some strange behavior." "Strange, but not necessarily incriminating." Kendall tapped her fingers on the table. "But I'm starting to think both Harlan and Everett know more than they're letting on." Suddenly, a realization hit her. She grabbed the file from the founder's room and began flipping through the documents again, scanning names and dates. One entry, dated 2 months ago, caught her attention. A large sum of money had been transferred to a private account linked to Bernard Winthrop. "The payer? Richard Everett." "I knew it," Kendall whispered. "Everett's been paying off Winthrop, but for what?" Lane leaned over. "Blackmail. Maybe. Or something bigger." Kendall stared at the document. The amount of money was too significant to be a simple bribe. Whatever Winthrop had over Everett, it was worth a fortune, and it got him killed. Just as Kendall was about to dig deeper, Lane's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his face tightening. "Detective, you need to see this." He handed her the phone, where an incoming call from the coroner's office flashed on the screen. Kendall answered, listening intently. "What do you mean you found something unusual?" she asked, her voice growing serious. The coroner's voice was calm but firm. The Bernard Winthrop didn't just die from the stab wound. There were traces of a rare, fast-acting poison in his system. Whoever stabbed him wanted to make sure he was dead quickly. It wasn't just rage, it was a carefully executed assassination. Kendall felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment murder. This was planned, methodical, and executed by someone who knew how to cover their tracks. And now, more than ever, she was certain, the Ivywood Club wasn't just hiding secrets. It was protecting a killer who had access to the highest levels of power. "You get everyone back into the dining hall," Kendall ordered, her voice hardening with resolve. "We're going to finish this tonight." Detective Kendall paced the grand dining hall as the Ivywood members gathered once more, their faces growing more anxious with each passing minute. The air was thick with tension, every eye fixed on her, waiting for the next move. Richard Everett stood off to the side, calm but watchful, while Amanda Harlan sat at the far end of the table, her fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood. Henry Clarkson was visibly sweating, stealing nervous glances at the others. Kendall had reviewed the evidence, but she knew this wasn't just about connecting the dots. It was about pushing the right buttons, unraveling the web of lies woven within the club's walls. The members weren't just suspects, they were players in a much larger game, and now it was time to make them show their hands. "All of you are here because you had something to gain or lose through Bernard Winthrop," Kendall began, her voice steady but cold. "We found more than just evidence of a stabbing. Winthrop was poisoned before he was killed, a rare toxin that would have ensured his death, even if the blade hadn't struck. This wasn't an act of passion, it was an execution." The room was silent, but tension rippled through the members like a tightening wire. "Let's talk about secrets," Kendall continued, holding up the confidential file she had taken from the founder's room. "This file documents every dirty deal, every underhanded agreement that Winthrop brokered through this club. Amanda Harlan, you were cutting deals for government contracts, and Richard Everett, you've been funneling money through Winthrop to cover your tracks. But that's not all. Winthrop wasn't just managing the club, he was controlling it, leveraging secrets to keep you all under his thumb." Amanda's eyes narrowed, her calm demeanor beginning to crack. So what are you saying, detective? That we all had a reason to kill him? That doesn't mean any of us did. Oh, but someone did, Kendall said, locking eyes with her, and I think you know exactly who. Before Amanda could respond, Richard Everett spoke up, his voice cool and commanding. This is all speculation, detective. You have no proof that any of us were involved in Bernard's death. Kendall smiled thinly. Funny you say that, Mr. Everett. I reviewed the footage, and it shows you entering Winthrop's office shortly after Amanda Harlan left the hallway. That doesn't look like speculation to me. Everett's jaw clenched, but he didn't flinch. I went to see Bernard. Yes, but when I arrived, he was already dead. I didn't touch him. Convenient, Kendall said, her tone icy. But I also found records of large payments you made to Winthrop. He was blackmailing you, wasn't he? Everett hesitated for a moment, his calm exterior cracking. Bernard knew things. Things that could ruin me. Yes, I paid him to keep certain business dealings out of the spotlight, but I didn't kill him. If anything, I needed him alive to keep the arrangement going. Kendall glanced at Amanda, her expression hardening. And you, Amanda. Your company's success has been tied to city contracts that Winthrop helped you secure. You were seen near his office minutes before his murder. What were you doing? Amanda's face remained a mask of cold resolve. I went to speak with him. We had a disagreement about a recent deal, but I left before anything happened. If you're suggesting I killed him, you're wasting your time. Kendall stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. You were both involved in this, weren't you? Winthrop had leverage over both of you, and it was only a matter of time before he squeezed too hard. You needed to get rid of him, but you couldn't afford to do it alone, so you worked together. Amanda's eyes flashed with anger, and she stood abruptly. I'm not a murderer, detective. Bernard may have had dirt on me, but that doesn't mean I'd kill him. Kendall wasn't swayed. She pulled out the toxicology report. The poison used on Winthrop was rare, something not easily acquired. But I did a little digging. One of the companies under Harlan Tech manufactures chemicals used in industrial processes. This toxin was traced back to a supplier your company works with, Amanda. Care to explain how it ended up in Bernard's system? Amanda's face went pale, the color draining from her as Kendall continued. You wanted him dead, Amanda, but you didn't want to get your hands dirty. So, you let Everett take care of the physical act while you supplied the poison. It was clean, efficient, no mess, but you underestimated how thorough I'd be. Everett stood now, his face reddening. This is absurd. You have no proof that I had anything to do with the poison. Kendall's eyes burned with intensity. Maybe not direct proof yet, but the pieces fit. You both had the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Bernard was holding too much power over you, and when he tried to push too far, you snapped. You made a mistake, though you were too careful. You left a trail of evidence because you thought no one would look closely enough at Ivywood. But I did. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda and Everett stood frozen, their masks of control slipping away. For a moment, it seemed as though the tension would snap into chaos. Then, unexpectedly, Amanda broke the silence. Fine, she said quietly, her voice cold. I was involved. Bernard pushed me to the edge. He threatened to destroy my company, my reputation, everything I'd built. I couldn't let that happen. Everett glared at her, his lips curling in disdain. You stupid. Shut up, Richard, Amanda snapped. You're just as guilty. You helped me, and you know it. You couldn't risk Bernard exposing your financial schemes any more than I could. We did it together, and now it's over. Kendall exhaled, her grip on her notepad tightening as Amanda's confession poured out. The pieces had finally fallen into place. Officer Lane moved swiftly to place both Amanda and Richard in cuffs. Everett sneered, muttering under his breath about the club's downfall, while Amanda kept her gaze forward, resigned to her fate. As they were led out of the room, Kendall felt the weight of the night begin to lift. The Ivywood Club had thrived on power and secrets for years, but tonight, its darkest chapter had been exposed. 2 days later, the Ivywood Club was eerily quiet. The news of Winthrop's murder and the involvement of high-profile members like Amanda Harlan and Richard Everett had shocked the city. Headlines screamed of corruption, cover-ups, and murder. Kendall knew this case would ripple far beyond Ivywood's ivy-covered walls. She sat in her office, going over the final reports. Both Amanda and Richard had been charged with murder, conspiracy, and a long list of other crimes tied to their dealings with Winthrop. As she flipped through the case files, she couldn't shake the feeling that there were still secrets buried within Ivywood, secrets she hadn't uncovered yet. Kendall's phone buzzed, breaking her concentration. It was Lane. You might want to see this, he said. Another file just came in, something we missed in the initial sweep of the club. Her stomach tightened. What now? We've only just started looking at it, Lane continued. But it's about other members, some of them even more powerful than Harlan and Everett. This goes deeper than we thought. Kendall stared at the phone, a chill running down her spine. The Ivywood Club had been cracked open, but the real question was, how much darker did the rabbit hole go? And was the city ready for what they might find next? Detective Kendall hung up the phone, her mind racing. The Ivywood Club had been hiding more than she'd ever anticipated. As she gathered her things to head back to the station, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her. Amanda Harlan and Richard Everett had confessed to their parts in Winthrop's murder, but the new file hinted that their actions were only a small part of something much larger, an underground network of corruption, deals, and perhaps more deaths. When she arrived at the station, Lane was already waiting for her in the conference room, where the newly uncovered file was spread out across the table. His face was serious as he gestured for Kendall to take a seat. This was hidden in a secure vault beneath the club. Lane began, flipping through the pages. "We missed it during the first sweep, because it was stored under a false identity, some kind of dummy account. But what's in here? Well, it changes everything." Kendall leaned in, her eyes scanning the documents. At first glance, it looked like another series of financial transactions, similar to the records they'd already uncovered. But as she read further, she realized the scope of what she was looking at. "These are names," Kendall said softly, her fingers tracing the lines of text. "High-profile names. Not just club members, judges, law enforcement officials, even politicians." Lane nodded grimly. "It's more than just blackmail. This is a list of people who were being paid off or controlled by Winthrop. And from the looks of it, he wasn't working alone. There's evidence that several Ivywood members were part of this, acting as intermediaries, making sure the right people stayed quiet." Kendall flipped to the next page and froze. There, in bold print, was the name of someone she recognized all too well, Chief Edward Talbot, head of the city's police department. "Talbot," Kendall muttered, disbelief creeping into her voice. She had worked under Chief Talbot for years, always believing him to be tough but incorruptible. But now, staring at his name on the list, her faith in him crumbled. This can't be right. Lane's face was stony. "It's not just Talbot. There are more. City council members, corporate executives, even people in the state government. They've all been part of this." Ivywood wasn't just a private club, it was the epicenter of a criminal syndicate, one that's been influencing everything in the city for decades. Kendall sat back in her chair, trying to absorb the enormity of what she was hearing. Winthrop's murder had opened a Pandora's box of corruption that extended far beyond the walls of the Ivywood Club. Taking down Amanda and Everett felt like a victory at the time, but now she realized it was just the beginning. "This isn't just a murder investigation anymore," Kendall said, her voice steady but low. "This is about tearing down an entire network of corruption. And if Talbot's involved, we can't trust anyone in the department. We have to be careful." Lane nodded. "I agree. We're going to need federal help on this one. Too many people in the city are compromised. We could be stepping on some very dangerous toes." Kendall stood, her resolve hardening. "We're not backing down. This has gone on for too long, and too many people have paid the price for Ivywood's secrets. We need to go after them all, every last person on this list." But deep down, she knew that bringing down such powerful people wouldn't be easy. Ivywood's reach was far and its members protected by influence and money. The deeper she and Lane dug, the more likely they were to face dangerous retaliation. As she gathered the files, Kendall's phone rang again. She glanced at the caller ID and saw an unknown number. "Detective Kendall," she answered cautiously. A voice on the other end, low and deliberate, spoke. "You're getting too close, Detective. Stop now, or you'll regret it." The line went dead. Kendall stared at the phone, her pulse quickening. This wasn't the first time she'd been threatened, but it felt different. Whoever was behind this network had eyes everywhere, and now they knew she was onto them. "We're being watched," Kendall said quietly, turning to Lane. "They know we found the file." Lane's jaw tightened. "Then we'd better move fast." Kendall nodded. There was no turning back now. The next few days were a whirlwind of secrecy and strategy. Kendall and Lane worked in isolation, sharing their findings with only a select few federal agents they trusted. They knew that any leak could tip off the wrong people and blow the entire investigation. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Ivywood's influence reached into the highest levels of power. Meanwhile, the city was reeling from the fallout of Winthrop's murder. News outlets were clamoring for details, but Kendall stayed quiet, knowing that releasing too much information would only endanger the case and herself. She had moved out of her apartment and into a safe house provided by the FBI, knowing that whoever was behind the network wouldn't hesitate to silence her permanently. One evening, as Kendall sat in the dim light of the safe house, her phone buzzed with a message from Lane. "We're ready. Meet me at the precinct." Kendall grabbed her coat and hurried out, her heart pounding. The time had come to make their move. When she arrived at the precinct, Lane was waiting for her outside, his face tense but determined. "We've got enough to bring in Chief Talbot," he said, "but we need to do it quietly. If he gets wind of what's happening, we'll lose our chance." Kendall nodded, her pulse quickening. "Let's go." They entered the precinct and made their way to Talbot's office, where the chief was sitting behind his desk, casually flipping through paperwork. When he saw Kendall and Lane enter, his expression shifted from mild surprise to guarded suspicion. "Detective Kendall," Officer Lane Talbot greeted them, his voice measured. "To what do I owe this visit?" Kendall stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "Chief Talbot, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and your involvement in the Ivy. For a split second, Talbot's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly masked it with a steely glare. "You're making a mistake, detective," he said, standing up. "I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but I suggest you think very carefully about where this is heading." Kendall wasn't intimidated. "We know everything, Chief. The payments, the deals, the favors. It's all in the file we recovered from Ivywood. You've been part of this for years, and it ends now." Talbot's face hardened. "You don't understand, do you? Ivywood isn't just a club. It's the backbone of this city. You think you can tear it down? You're a fool, Kendall. If you go through with this, you'll destroy more than just me. You'll bring the entire system crashing down." Kendall's voice was cold and resolute. "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen." Talbot glared at her, then at Lane, before finally allowing himself to be cuffed. As he was led away, Kendall felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The arrest of Chief Talbot would send shockwaves through the city. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Ivywood network was vast, and there were still many more people to bring to justice. Outside the precinct, reporters were already gathering, cameras flashing as they caught sight of Talbot being escorted out in handcuffs. The city would soon know the truth that the Ivywood Club, once the epicenter of power and influence, was nothing more than a den of corruption. Kendall stood in the fading light, watching the chaos unfold around her. She knew the fight was far from over. There were still dangerous people out there, people who wouldn't hesitate to strike back. But for the first time, the veil had been lifted, and the Ivywood Club's secrets were no longer safe. As she turned to leave, Lane fell into step beside her. "What now?" he asked, his voice quiet. Kendall exhaled, her mind already racing toward the next steps. "Now we finish what we started. We take down every last one of them." And with that, Kendall walked into the night, ready for the storm that was sure to follow.